Across the world, there are three major monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. There are also non-monotheistic traditions such as Buddhism and Hinduism. And when people think of Japan, many might assume it is mainly a Buddhist country. Yet Japan also has Shinto, its indigenous religious tradition, and many people aren't quite sure how Shinto and Buddhism differ. In this video, we'll focus on the differences between Shinto and Buddhism and explore the deep spiritual culture that Japan has developed over time. Shinto and Buddhism. Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples look like this. If you've ever traveled in Japan, you've probably seen them. In fact, not only do they sometimes look similar, there are also many places where a shrine and a temple stand right next to each other on the same grounds. In Japan, people often visit a shrine at New Year's, and many children's celebrations, such as Shichi-go-san, are also held at shrines. On the other hand, funerals are usually Buddhist, and a priest may visit the family to chant sutras in honor of the ancestors. In this kind of way, Shinto and Buddhism coexist deeply in Japan, and in everyday life, many people don't consciously think about the difference. But these two are clearly different religions, with different origins and purposes. So let's dig deeper, starting with the foundations. But before we continue, a quick note. In this video, following common Japanese usage, shrine means a Shinto shrine, and temple means a Buddhist temple. What is Shinto? Shinto is a unique religious tradition. At its core, Shinto is rooted in reverence for deities, for nature, and for one's ancestors. Shinto has no formal doctrine, and it has no single sacred scripture like the Bible. It is deeply embedded in everyday life from ancient times, and it is closely tied to living in harmony with nature, almost like a way of faith that grew out of daily life itself. Shinto recognizes many deities, often described as Yaoyorozu no Kami, 8 million deities, meaning that divine presence can dwell in all things. Because of this, shrines often enshrine natural objects, such as rocks, trees, rivers, or mountains, as sacred, and people show respect to the deity or divine presence, believed to dwell there. For that reason, the origins of Shinto are not clearly defined. It is widely thought that long before written history, local and indigenous beliefs were scattered across Japan. And as the Japanese state gradually formed, those beliefs became more systematized over time. In other words, for a very long time, the Japanese revered their ancestors and nature, believing that deities, or divine presence, dwell within them. And that worldview eventually came to be organized into what we now call Shinto. So Shinto does not revolve around strict doctrines or detailed moral commandments. Rather than teaching a fixed set of beliefs, Shinto is about sensing nature and the deities in one's heart. And its practices center on rituals and customs that help people do exactly that. That said, when you visit a shrine, you will find religious specialists called Kannushi, Shinto priests, who carry out many daily duties. Every day, they offer prayers to the deity enshrined there, praying for people's well-being, for agricultural abundance, and for protection from disasters. This is because in Shinto, deities and nature are deeply intertwined. Deities may protect people from misfortune, but they may also be behind it. People visit shrines regularly to seek blessings and to request specific prayers or purification rituals. Originally, Shinto was centered on sensing nature and deities and wishing for happiness through gratitude and prayer. Over time, these practices became more organized and systematized, and today we see them expressed across Japan through many rituals and customs. By the way, the Emperor of Japan, known as the Tenno, is traditionally said to be a descendant of Amaterasu, the sun goddess and a supreme deity in Shinto. The Tenno today carries out public duties as the symbol of the nation, much like European royal families, but also plays an important role in Shinto rites, performing rituals throughout the year to pray for the well-being of Japan and the world. What is Buddhism? So then, what is Buddhism? Unlike Shinto, Buddhism is a tradition that teaches how to live life in a way that leads to true well-being. Buddhism has scriptures, sutras, and it has a clear origin and founder. If Shinto is something you sense with the heart, Buddhism can be described as something you understand with the mind and put into practice. Buddhism began about 2,500 years ago, when a man known as Siddhartha Gautama, later known as the Buddha or Shakyamuni, attained enlightenment in India and began teaching based on that realization. He spent his life asking, why do human beings suffer so much? And is there any way to be freed from that suffering? Then one day, while deep in meditation, he attained enlightenment, gaining profound insight into the nature of suffering, its causes, and the path beyond it. After that, he began teaching what he had realized to his disciples. Those teachings were passed down by his followers and later written down as Buddhist scriptures. So compared to Shinto, Buddhism has more of a manual for living better. It focuses on guidance, how to be freed from suffering, and how to attain awakening or enlightenment. And as a result, many training methods and systems of practice were developed to realize these goals. Over time, these evolved into many different schools and sects, leading to the diverse landscape of Buddhism we see today. By the way, Buddhism began in India, later spread to China, and around the 6th century it was transmitted to Japan from the Korean peninsula. The fusion of Shinto and Buddhism. So, in short, Shinto places strong emphasis on ritual practices for sensing deities and nature, and praying for blessings and protection. Buddhism, on the other hand, is grounded in awakening and teachings about how to live, almost like a guidebook for life. Because their approaches were so different, in Japan they did not necessarily compete. Instead, they came to coexist. And another reason they could coexist may be that neither tradition is a strict monotheism centered on a single absolute God. Both are closer to polytheistic worldviews that accept multiple divine beings. So how did this fusion develop over time, and how did it shape the Japan we see today? Let's follow the thread. First, in Japan, though there are various theories, it is often said that the Yayoi period, an era of agriculture and rice cultivation, began around the 3rd century BC. Before that was the Jomon period, a hunter-gatherer era that is believed to have continued for more than 10,000 years. During those earlier times, Japan likely did not yet have a fully systematized tradition called Shinto. Instead, people in many regions worshipped nature, ancestors, and spiritual beings, and praying for blessings was simply part of everyday life. By the way, have you ever seen Studio Ghibli's Princess Mononoke? The village where the main character Ashitaka lives, shown at the beginning of the film, gives a glimpse of exactly that kind of worldview. Later, the Yayoi period is thought to have ended around the 3rd century, and Japan entered an era in which a more unified state began to form. And it was in this context, around the 6th century, that Buddhism arrived in Japan from the Asian continent. By that time, something that could be called Japan's first state had already begun to take shape, and its supreme ruler was the emperor known as the Tenno, traditionally believed to be a descendant of Amaterasu, the sun goddess and a supreme deity in Shinto. In other words, by this point, Shinto was already intertwined with politics. It had evolved beyond local indigenous belief and was becoming a system of ideas that formed a foundation of the state. Buddhism, arriving from the continent in this era, was a religion with a very different approach, and at the time, it was also seen as containing many new teachings. So Buddhism was, broadly speaking, accepted in Japan. The powerful figures of the time likely understood that, whatever the debates, Shinto, deeply rooted in Japan, could not be ignored. And Buddhism, carrying new ideas, institutions, and knowledge from the continent, also could not be dismissed either. So through many kinds of innovations and adjustments, they moved in the direction of making the two coexist. In fact, Buddhism was not seen only as religious doctrine, but also as a sophisticated body of learning and ritual practice transmitted from the continent. So Shinto and Buddhism began to walk together in Japan. But what transformations did they go through to reach the form we see today? Let's follow that fascinating story and, through it, explore the spiritual mindset of the Japanese people. The history of fusion. The period from the 6th to the 8th century, when both Shinto and Buddhism began to take more established forms in Japan, overlaps with the emergence of Japan's first unified state, beginning with the Nara period. It was a time when the very shape of the state was being formed. In that context, Shinto and Buddhism already began to coexist. The Nihon Shoki, compiled in 720, along with the Kojiki, compiled in 712, is one of Japan's oldest official historical chronicles, and it contains accounts of how Shinto developed. In a sense, it can be seen as one of the earliest texts connected to Shinto, since Shinto has no single holy book. But the Nihon Shoki already mentions Buddhism, and it describes Buddhist divinities as foreign deities. In contrast, the native Shinto deities are distinguished as deities originating in Japan. Up to this point, court rituals had been centered primarily on Shinto-style rites. But during the period when the Nihon Shoki was being compiled, when Shinto was being systematized and Buddhism was also spreading, Buddhist elements also began to be incorporated into ceremonies of the imperial court. Perhaps the Japanese were eager to incorporate new religious ideas arriving from the continent. Then, around the 8th century, another fascinating interpretation began to spread. Religious practitioners started reshaping the understanding of Shinto deities so that Shinto and Buddhism could fit together. The idea was that Shinto deities too could be subject to suffering, much like human beings. So, in this view, the deities would need relief and ultimately deliverance through the Buddha's teachings. As a result, Buddhist scriptures came to be recited at shrines to ease the Shinto deities' suffering and guide them toward liberation. In a sense, this is the idea that the Shinto deities themselves seek salvation through the Buddhist Dharma. Over time, this interpretation developed even further. At Usa Hachimangu Shrine in northern Kyushu, rituals emerged that strongly bound Shinto and Buddhism together. And later, in 781, Hachiman, the deity enshrined there, was granted the Buddhist title of Bodhisattva, Hachiman Daibosatsu, meaning Hachiman Bodhisattva. This interpretation continued to evolve. From roughly the 9th to the 12th centuries, some Shinto deities and Buddhist deities came to be understood as essentially the same. This is known as the Honji Suijaku theory. Under this theory, some Shinto deities are temporary manifestations of Buddhist deities, appearing in local form in Japan in order to save people. In other words, certain Shinto deities are seen as traces, local manifestations of Buddhist deities, while those Buddhist deities are regarded as the original true form behind them. This went beyond earlier interpretations of coexistence and proposed that certain Shinto deities and Buddhist deities were, in essence, one and the same. From this period onward, some Shinto deities enshrined at shrines were paired with specific Buddhist deities regarded as their original form. For example, Ise Jingu is one of the most famous shrines in Japan, and it enshrines Amaterasu, a central Shinto deity. Yet there is also a theory that Amaterasu's original form is Dainichi Nyorai, the cosmic Buddha at the heart of esoteric Buddhism. The creative ways Japan attempted to harmonize Shinto and Buddhism are truly fascinating. Of course, there were also Shinto thinkers who disliked how deeply Buddhism entered the Shinto world. From after the 10th century, some shrines began to prohibit the use of Buddhist terms or scriptures. And from around the 11th century, within court rituals, the tendency to avoid Buddhist elements grew stronger. However, this was limited to court rituals, and it does not mean that Buddhist elements were banned from Shinto nationwide. In general, across Japan, the fusion and coexistence of Shinto and Buddhism continued, and at the level of ordinary people, many likely did not clearly distinguish between the two. After that, different regions and institutions developed more different approaches. For example, there were ideas such as Shinpon Butsujaku, the view that Buddhist deities are temporary forms of Shinto deities, and that Shinto deities are the original foundation. As a whole, while there were many twists and turns depending on the place and time, overall Shinto and Buddhism continued to coexist throughout Japanese history. From the Edo period to the modern era. Then, during the Edo period, from the 17th century onward, intellectual movements such as Confucian scholarship and Kokugaku, or national learning, grew in influence, along with a stronger sense of Japan's native identity and ideas about the nation and the state. As a result, the belief that Shinto was Japan's original religion became more influential, and in the late Edo period, Buddhism's status and authority began to be questioned. Movements to separate shrines and temples grew stronger in many regions, and in 1868, the Meiji government launched policies of Shinbutsu Bunri, the separation of Shinto and Buddhism, effectively banning their institutional fusion. After that, Shinto was positioned as a foundation of the state and used politically. After Japan lost World War II, the separation of religion and state was established, and the formal ties between Shinto and politics were dissolved. Even so, in Japan today, some people still strongly feel that Shinto represents Japan's national identity. But that doesn't mean Buddhism is regarded as any less important. In fact, many Japanese people don't see Shinto and Buddhism as competing traditions, and they value both. Even now, at the level of everyday life, Shinto and Buddhism still coexist deeply. In Japan, funerals are mostly held in Buddhist style, while weddings are often held in chapels or in Shinto style. And at the start of the new year, people visit shrines to pray for good fortune. In many places, shrines and temples still stand side by side, and people may also stop by the temple to offer a prayer as well. Unified theory. When we trace Japanese history, we can see how leaders and religious figures made many efforts to allow Shinto, an indigenous tradition, and Buddhism, an intriguing teaching from abroad, to coexist. Perhaps in an age before modern science, religion was closer to a kind of scholarship for making sense of the world and everything in it. And the Japanese may have felt an impulse to fuse two different systems of understanding, Shinto and Buddhism, into a single, more unified worldview. In a way, it feels similar to how physicists search for a unified theory, one framework that can explain different forces through a single set of principles. And yet, in the end, at the level of ordinary people, Shinto and Buddhism were simply both sacred and worthy of gratitude. And that continues in Japan even today. So far in this video, we've looked at the differences between Shinto and Buddhism mainly from a historical perspective. But what about the actual teachings and practices? In simple terms, if Shinto shrines are places where people pray to deities for protection and blessings, then Buddhist temples are places where people learn the Buddha's teachings, wisdom for overcoming the suffering of life. Interestingly, because Japan developed its culture without being invaded by other nations for a very long time, Buddhism in Japan also evolved in its own unique way, different from India or China. In future videos, we'll step closer to the source, unpacking the spirit of Shinto and the wisdom of Buddhism, each in its own right.